and maybe we can go into details of the human rights violation in the Emirates with Mrs. Safwa Aïssa, who is Executive Director of the International Center for Justice and Human Rights. Please, you have the floor.
Merci. Je sais pas si ça marche, hein, je pense. Oui. Merci, mesdames et messieurs. Je vous remercie d'être présents aujourd'hui. Hein,
just a technical information. You have a translation
yes.
on channel 3 into English.
Two.
Or two.
On va changer peut-être. Two.
Two. Channel 2. Sorry.
No.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to welcome you to this side event. I would like to thank very much the organizers for having invited me to discuss this very important subject with you. Our organization, which is Geneva-based, works a lot on the situation in the Gulf and mainly in the United Arab Emirates. That's why I am speaking today exclusively about the human rights situation. I'm not going to talk about other subjects as my colleague has just done. I will confine myself to the situation in the United Arab Emirates, mainly the situation of human rights defenders. If we go back in history somewhat, the situation does not date from today. It was 6 years ago, mainly in March 2011, that about 100 militants, teachers, lawyers and students and eminent personalities in the United Arab Emirates chose to reflect on the situation of the country in terms of politics and social policies in order to guarantee more rights in the country. That's why they launched a petition for reform. It was a petition addressed to the Emirati authorities, calling for free election of the members of the Federal National Council, in other words the Emirati Parliament, by all citizens, and a reform of the laws and the constitution to allow for more plurality in the country, because the Emirati law does not allow political parties to be created in that country. Since that petition, well, it was expected that the authorities would react positively to this petition, because many of the people who were demanding the reform were members of the government at that time and were part of the country's politics at that time. So their intention was to peacefully ask for reforms to the political system that was in place at that time. But what happened was totally the opposite. The response of the authorities was very repressive, and the authorities considered this petition to be an attack on the state and an encouragement of disobedience, civil disobedience, and failure to respect the law, and that it was threatening the security of the state. So it became a threat to the Emirati authorities. Severe repression was then carried out by authorities, and this led to many forced disappearances, arbitrary detentions, torture as well. And among the people arrested there were human rights defenders, lawyers, bloggers and signatories of the petition, who were therefore the systematic targets of the state security apparatus, the state itself. So there were mass arrests that took place between March 2012 and December 2012, and among the persons arrested were members of the association Al-Islah, which was an association that was doing peaceful work for social association in the country. Many members of that association were arrested and they were tried. It's a trial which is known by the name of the UAE 94. On March the 4th, 2013, the mass trial of the group known as the 94 Emiratis started, and on July the 2nd, 2013, the court condemned 69 of the defendants out of 94, 8 of whom were sentenced in absentia, and acquitted 25 other persons. The prison sentences were set at between 7 and 15 years for presumed violation of Article 180 of the Criminal Code, which prohibits the creation, the organization, or the management of a group which aims at overthrowing the political system of the country. So the mistake they had made, the alleged mistake they had made, was to have demanded reforms in the country, and the response of the government was to sentence them to prison sentences ranging between 7 and 15 years, because those persons were considered as wanting to overthrow the country. The defendants included some eminent lawyers, human rights lawyers, like Mohammed Al-Rokan, who has received human rights prizes awarded by various organizations, and Mohammed Al-Mansouri, and there were also, in addition to these two persons, judges, jurists, teachers, and student leaders. There was also the judge Mohammed Said Al-Abdouli and the university professor and jurist Hadef Al-Awais. There were also some members of the royal family. But the process did not stop there. When we're talking about this petition, people say, well, there were some persons arrested among the Emirati personalities, leading figures, and the UN observers deemed that the trial was an unfair trial, as did other international observers. But unfortunately, the process did not stop there. And what I would like to say is to explain what is happening currently in the region. And here we realize that the authorities took this peaceful demand for reform not as a demand to collaborate with and talk to the authorities in order to guide the country more towards democracy and political stability, but the demand was interpreted as a threat to the stability of the country. Obviously, the context at that time was the context of the Arab Spring. So the regime that was in place did not content itself with repressing its own citizens, but engaged in a war against the Arab Spring and conducted a counter-revolution in the whole region. They began by arresting residents and migrant workers who were residents in the UAE. So UAE residents and migrant workers, above all Egyptians, were arrested. So there was a wave of arrests among Egyptians who were resident at the time in the UAE. They were accused of belonging to or supporting the Muslim Brothers. There were also Libyan businessmen who were regarded as supporting the Libyan revolution, also Yemenites, Syrians, Palestinians, and in total nearly 200 prisoners of conscience, prisoners of opinion, are lingering in the prisons among the Emiratis and non-Emiratis who are in prison there. Secondly, the regime also enlisted the support of repressive laws which aim at restricting the freedom of expression. Since the Arab Spring, state security and terrorism have become pretexts used by the authorities to repress peaceful activists and political opponents. As far as the laws are concerned, there are two main laws which are very important in the Emirates and which pose a problem right up to today. That is the law on cyber crime, which was amended in 2012, and the anti-terrorism law, which was promulgated in 2014. These two laws pose enormous problems because they are used not as a pretext to create law and order in the country, but as a pretext to reduce to silence any activist, militant or opponent to the government. We will see in a moment how the authorities and the legal authorities use these laws to unfairly and inequitably judge militants, activists and human rights defenders. In the name of these two laws, a wave of forced disappearances was seen, arbitrary detentions and unfair trials which aim only at criminalizing human rights defenders. The death penalty is used frequently and arbitrarily under the law against terrorism, and also the law on cybercrime makes it possible for any attack on the symbols of the state or any insults or any criticisms of the president are punishable by prison sentences up to 15 years. For example, in March 2014, it was under the law on cybercrime that Osama al-Najjar was arrested and then sentenced to 3 years imprisonment for having posted just tweets that mentioned the detention of his father Hussein al-Najjar and having mentioned the ill treatment that he was subjected to. In August 2015, the authorities arrested Dr. Nasser bin Gait, who is an academic and an economic consultant in the military field. He was kept in a secret prison for 8 months until March 2017, the date of his trial, when the Federal Court of Appeal of Abu Dhabi, presided over by an Egyptian judge, sentenced him to 10 years imprisonment for having published on his personal Twitter account a comment criticizing the Egyptian government. He criticized the policy of the Egyptian government in this tweet, and he was judged on account of this, and the charges held against him were that by publishing this tweet he committed a hostile act against a foreign state, Egypt, and he posted false information about the government of the UAE, and he incited people to hatred against the government, and he was also accused of cooperating with the party Ummah, which is an Emirati party that was created outside of the UAE by exiles. So it was because of this tweet, which was a very simple matter for him, that he received his prison sentence of 3 years. During his trial, he informed the judge of the torture and ill treatment that he had received, but the judge refused to hear him. After his sentencing, Dr. bin Gait embarked on a hunger strike in order to contest his unfair trial and to contest the fact that this trial had been presided over by a judge of Egyptian nationality, which calls into question the validity and reliability of this trial, because he was sentenced for having committed an act that was hostile to Egypt, and he was judged by a judge of Egyptian nationality. In December 2015, the Jordanian journalist Tayseer al-Najjar, a member of the Journalists Trade Union and of the Jordan Writers Association, was arrested by the state security services and then was forced to disappear for months before, on March the 15th, 2017, the Federal Court of Abu Dhabi sentenced him to 3 years imprisonment and to a fine of 500,000 Emirati dirham following a comment published on Facebook, which was considered by the authorities as a threat to national security and compromising public order by virtue of the Federal Law number 5 of 2012 on the fight against cybercrime. In July 2014, during the Gaza conflict, Tayseer al-Najjar published the following message on Facebook. Message intended for journalists and writers who do not like the resistance in Gaza. In a case, there is always one party that's right and the other which is wrong. The party that's right here is the resistance in Gaza. All the others are ill-intentioned. For example, Israel, the UAE, al-Sisi, President of Egypt, and other regimes which are no longer afraid of covering themselves with shame. On March the 20th, 2017, at about 3 o'clock in the morning, the Emirati authorities broke into the family domicile of the human rights activist Mr. Ahmed Mansour, who won the Martin Ennals Prize in 2015. The state security agents searched the house and without a warrant, and confiscated all the computers and cell phones of the family, including those of his children and wife. And he was then carried off by force and kept at an unknown location. So the place of his detention was kept secret until the UN experts published a communique calling on the authorities to publish the place, to disclose the place where he was being held. And the authorities praised the competencies of Mr. Mansour and his cooperation with the UN authorities specialized in this field. Following this visit, the authorities agreed to communicate where Mr. Mansour was being held under the pressure that was being applied to them. And they said that he was being held in a place which housed the state security authority, but up to now his family has only been able to visit him once, and he does not have access to a lawyer, and he has been subject to ill treatment in this prison. Unfortunately, Mr. Ahmed Mansour was the last activist who was free before he was arrested. He was an important source of information for the international organizations and United Nations bodies. Experts consider the arrest of Mr. Ahmed Mansour as being a direct attack on his legitimate work as a human rights defender. And in other countries, there are, even in Bahrain, there are some human rights defenders who, despite the difficult context, are able to carry out their work. But in UAE, such human rights defenders have to work in secret due to fear of reprisals against their family members. So, due to fear of these reprisals, they often refuse to give the names of people. And we know that there are dozens of cases of people, including women, who are deprived of their passports and deprived of the possibility of studying and their income, and they cannot even get access to their bank account, and are deprived of their property simply because they are close to a prisoner or a human rights defender. Among the serious violations that we are currently witnessing, there is the case of revocations of nationalities. There are many such cases for certain people due to their activity on Twitter. It's the case, for example, of 3 members of a family, Asma, Dua and Omar al-Siddiq, the children of the political prisoner Abdelrazak al-Siddiq. In order to punish him, they have been deprived of their nationality and their papers, so you can imagine their situation. These young people cannot continue their studies, and it's going to be difficult for them to work. Often when the authorities revoke a nationality, they are Emirati citizens, they are not foreign residents. Often they are asked to leave the country when they're deprived of their nationality. And the situation in the prison called Al-Razin is also alarming and is taking a turn for the worse. We learned a few weeks ago that searches are being carried out there, and they're also searching the intimate body parts. Imagine what this means in such a conservative country. This type of conduct is extremely serious, searching people and people's private body parts in prisons, and the political prisoners were ordered to be undressed to humiliate them. and they were also some of the prisoners of opinion were also touched up and subjected to sexual harassment. Following this ill treatment, the political prisoner Omran al-Radwan embarked on a hunger strike, and he said that he was disgusted since this humiliating body search and was ready to die following this bad treatment. The restrictions brought by the laws are continuing, not just with the two laws I've referred to, but also the amendment of the Criminal Code in 2016, which introduces articles of laws which further restrict freedom of expression. Anyone who insults or attacks the president of the country or the symbols of the state can be sent to prison for up to 25 years. And nearly 200 prisoners of opinion, prisoners of conscience, among whom prisoners who have completed their sentence are still they've completed their sentence but are still in prison. And today, under the new law against terrorism, the authorities are arbitrarily extending the prison sentences of political prisoners. This is the case of Osama al-Najjar and Ahmed al-Bula and others who have been transferred to so-called advisory centers, munasaha, which are dedicated to persons who constitute a danger. But Osama al-Najjar was judged under the law on cybercrime, but at the end of his sentence he is being transferred to a munasaha center intended for terrorists. Despite their active presence on the Human Rights Council, the Emirates, UAE, as a member of the Council, have not ratified inter alia the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, nor the International Covenant on Economic and Social Rights. After the arrest of Ahmed Mansour, the reliable information on human rights violations is becoming more and more difficult to obtain. According to our last recommendation, the UAE have to respect the commitments that they made following their last universal periodic review in 2013. And we hope that they will be able to do so before the next universal periodic review in 2018. And the government in place will be able to put in practice its many promises. Thank you, Mrs. Aïssa, for your extremely well-documented presentation on human rights violations in the United Arab Emirates. As we have heard, these violations also affect foreign nationals.